Hey team, Luke here. I just jumping at the start to apologise for the relatively low quality of my audio this week. A series of unfortunate events, including a internet outage and a change of recording date, led to my audio track not being what we'd hoped. But we've decided to release the episode anyway. We still think it's a good chat, and we promise we'll be back to our regular quality audio next week. This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts, Global Vice President for promoting the Patreon of the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good evening, Luke and Tennant. I'm here on Gadigal country, and can I say it is like the best week of the year to be the LMSU hype woman. Because
you've got something to sell.
Oh, yes. Look at my wares. Because it's budget week. Cue, like, I'm doing, happy spirit fingers that the listeners can't see but surely can feel in my voice.
No doubt.
You'll be intrigued to know that we're not talking about the budget on this episode, and that's because we are choosing to put that behind the LMSU paywall. We are shamelessly saying, for those of you hardcore policy wonks, and we know there are plenty of you that listen to this pod, we're going to stick that in the Patreon as a little BOCO, or a big BOCO, as it were.
As a big thank you to all the listeners that have already subscribed and who may not have time to read all of those many hundreds of budget pages,
yes,
but can rely on us to peruse them for them and sum them up. And yes, right, you're right, Frankie, a small inducement for the handful of listeners who have not yet subscribed.
Yes, my official title is VP of Marketing and Extortion. So just to make sure I cover off the extortion bit of the title, I do have to say I think we're making some good progress on our Patreon. We did start by launching it and telling all of you lovely summer uppers that we're trying to get enough funding put away in there to cover the cost of us getting an editor on board, mostly to make Luke's life a little more bearable in doing the pod. And I just wanted to let you know that we're going well. We're probably about a third of the way there in terms of what we need. So whilst I'm all about hyping up the pod and the Patreon, if there are some of you out there, summer uppers, who are thinking, the other listeners have got it covered, well, we'd love to welcome you into the super summer opera tent over at the Patreon, and delectable budget delights awaiting for you there in the form of juicy new BOCO.
Us reading and summing up the budget papers so you don't have to. That's got to be worth a tenner.
That's right.
Patreon.com/Let Me Sum Up. Several minutes into the podcast, and I haven't even introduced a man who at a recent social event for climate and energy wonks received a surprising amount of opprobrium when he added a Hawaiian pizza to the table order. Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
I wish it to be known that I have enough pizza snob cred, enough commitment to slow rise, to stylistically appropriate pizza construction, that when I say Hawaiian done well is a perfectly legitimate pizza topping, you better believe it's true.
Yes, yes. Well, look, as a man who cut his teeth on the pizza shops of country Victoria, I must admit that for much of my childhood, I wasn't even aware there were varieties of pizza that didn't have pineapple.
As the resident Italian on this podcast, I'm feeling a little blindsided, Tennant, that I didn't know this about you before now. Like, this is offensive to me on a very deep level.
My favourite pizza topping is not Hawaiian. It is red onion, parmesan, pistachios and rosemary, which is amazing. And I managed to get one of those pizzas by making a daring escape from the airport in Phoenix, Arizona, in the middle of a complex junket to go to one of the most famous pizza restaurants in the world and bring pizza back to be eaten in an airport Starbucks by the rest of my delegation. So when I say, having done that, good Hawaiian's great, I'm serious. Serious.
We can now agree to keep disagreeing on that one, clearly.
All right.
If we need to host the great pizza debate, I propose we move it to the BOCO section of the podcast.
It'll be a bake-off.
Because we have an episode to get to. Look, on this week's show, we dig into a new report from the Grattan Institute that considers how we should navigate the wild rapids of coal closures we are facing over the next few years, while simultaneously strategizing for smooth sailing beyond. But first, the Biden administration's war on the American way of life continues, at least according to critics of the Environmental Protection Agency's recent rulemaking that will see coal plants forced to either capture their emissions or shut down. The new rule will apply to existing coal-fired generators that expect to run beyond 2032 and new natural gas-fired generators, with all these plants required to either capture and store 90% of their emissions by 2039 or cease operating. That is, of course, assuming the new rule survives the inevitable legal challenges. So, Frankie, what do you reckon? Is this a make-work scheme for the US CCS industry or a roundabout way of shutting down a lot of coal plants?
So, I mean, these rules have been foreshadowed for a couple of years, and there's loads of history that we could backtrack our way to as early as Obama's Clean Power Plan, which faced a lot of court challenges and has meant the EPA has had to refocus and sort of work back its focus through, the various levers that it's got available. But I think the consensus is that most coal, this is probably going to accelerate the closure of a bunch of coal plants if it stands up, right? So there's all the usual speculation around challenges to this, and Republican states and Congress have got form on this, but that the requirement for reducing emissions 90% through carbon capture and storage is it's big, it's expensive, so. If it stands, you'd have to think that's going to see a bunch of those coal plants closing in the next little while. And we should also say that there are 4 rules here that have been passed. So the piece on emissions is obviously the one that people focus on, but there are other rules there that go to air quality, water quality from runoff, and then how coal ash is managed as well. So taken together, it's a pretty kind of comprehensive package of measures, and the whole that's the whole impetus. And if you look at the way that the Biden White House has messaged this out, it's all about providing certainty for industry. So yeah, I think you'd look at that and you'd have to say there's not really much way around it if you're an aging coal plant needing to retrofit that kind of technology. I just can't see that being commercial. And also, I was curious on your perspectives on what you think that means for new gas as well, having to do the same.
Yeah, well, so I agree that this is effectively a death sentence to existing coal plants. In theory, there are big subsidies available through the US tax code that were boosted by the Inflation Reduction Act, but were there beforehand for carbon capture and storage or carbon capture and utilisation. So, there's the stick and the carrot for power plants to do CCS, but in coal, it just looks like a complete dog, and it doesn't matter how many bones you throw it, it's not going to bark. Is that the metaphor? For gas, well, it's a maybe. because the fuel is, for the time being at least, very cheap in the US, and there is a technology that is being spruiked by some interesting companies in the States, alum cycle combustion, where the fuel is burnt in a pure oxygen environment and the CO2 is used as a working medium for the turbine. And one of the side effects of that is that you have a pure CO2 stream of exhaust, making capture and storage relatively easy. So, like, honking big subsidies plus a huge regulatory stick plus this emerging technology plus cheap gas equals maybe. But I think the biggest avenue that's still open for gas is these gas plants that run less of the time, non-baseload gas plants, because they face a lower emissions requirement. If they're sort of intermediate, 20 to 40% capacity factor gas plants, then they just have to keep their emissions below about half a tonne per megawatt hour, which in theory they could do by blending in some hydrogen. And peaking gas plants just have to use natural gas and not diesel for the time being. And there's going to be some more rules released for existing gas plants, content yet to be clear. They are going to, I mean, we'll see. That'll be very contested, and those won't be out until 2025, i.e. first year of the next administration, whoever that is. So, don't know, but I would guess that would wind up under a Biden too, being you've got to do the equivalent of 90% CCS as well. So it's pretty tough. We were all talking about like the hurricane of carrots from the IRA, but well, the sticks are coming home to roost.
Just loving that my hurricane of carrots standing the test of time.
Yeah. I'm just ducking and weaving to avoid all the carrots flying around. Maybe they'll feature in the upcoming sequel to Twister. That's what we're all looking forward to, I'm sure.
Less cows.
I reckon this is a case of careful what you wish for, or indeed what sensible policies you kill through ruthless advocacy over many decades. Because, US fossil fuel interests have been very effective at avoiding any sort of cap and trade or emissions trading scheme, something which would spread the pain over and result in, efficient emissions reductions across the economy without sort of targeting any particular sector. And so we're in the world where the EPA gets to use the rules that it has, which is regulating emissions on site. And it's quite important to note that this new rule, it is focused on reducing emissions within the boundaries of a particular site. There is nothing like the mechanisms that exist in our own safeguard mechanism, where there's the opportunity to create tradable credits that can help share the pain and get some of that economic efficiency. And they're just saying, well, okay, we're just going to have to work within the boundaries, and so you have to reduce your own emissions through CCS. And by the way, you've all been spruiking the benefits of CCS over those many decades, and so, well, that's clearly your preferred mechanism, so off you go.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the back room of the EPA, someone's feeling quite pleased with themselves about the poetry of this particular bit of rulemaking. And I understand they're quite hopeful that these rules will withstand the inevitable court challenges, because they have been very careful to hew to some of the guardrails that have been created through previous court rulings that have grappled with these sorts of rules that the EPA has attempted to make in the past.
Yeah, that was the background we were alluding to at the top. Like Obama's Clean Power Plan was looking at emissions limits across the sector, so that beyond the fence line approach, and then that was subject to a bunch of litigation, and so inevitably EPA have had to kind of rein back in and comply with those various findings. So it is, I think I agree with you. It's sort of a careful what you wish for. The power sector's been effectively saying for a long time, oh, but, we can do CCS and, well, here you go. Do it. 90%. Show us how commercial that is.
It's such a saga of bad faith. Like the challenges to the Obama rule required right-leaning people in the States to profess to be deeply offended by regulatory flexibility and economic efficiency, and defenders of a pure hewing to command and control regulation. And now people on the centre left have got to purport that CCS in the power sector is a commercially available, economically the best option technology that's, just take it off the shelf, away you go. And all these power sector people are going to be pretending that, that they never said that CCS was ready to go or imminent. And it does not reflect well on the US policy process. But, if it sticks, it'll be a very effective complement to the spending side. And the US will achieve the power sector piece of its commitments as long as they can actually get new stuff built, which tighter regulatory sticks is... They are doing other things to try to ease new construction, but this is the closure piece.
You would think that the US will then become the proving ground for whether CCS is going to stack up in a power sector application. That'll have kind of global implications, presumably.
Yeah. If it's not going to happen under these conditions, I don't think it's going to happen anywhere.
Yeah. So that will be fascinating to watch.
Silly US people. Lucky here in Australia we have such sensible, rational, far-sighted policy in response to emerging challenges in our power system.
And universal good faith. That's our hallmark.
Shall we chat about the report?
That was cheeky.
The last decade has been marked by growing concerns over energy affordability and reliability as the energy system transforms around us. As a result, energy ministers have been increasingly disinclined to leave it up to energy market bodies to manage the transition from large coal-fired generators to renewable generation. This has resulted in an avalanche of ad hoc policy, from the renewable energy zones originally proposed by the Finkel Review to the Albanese government's recent supercharged capacity investment scheme. It is all a bit messy and the pathway forward less than clear. However, the Grattan Institute has cut its way into the thicket and attempted to provide a compass bearing in the form of a new report titled Keeping the Lights On: How Australia Should Navigate the Era of Coal Closures and Prepare for What Comes Next. In it, they make an interesting distinction between the current era in which Australia's coal fleet is mostly retiring and the post-coal era. Grattan reckons while we are managing the departure of coal from the system, we should strap in for plenty more muddling through. However, they are quick to add, we should not give up on the sunny uplands of the post-coal era, which may provide the prospect of the reset to policy, governance and social licence that many yearn for. Tennant, I thought this was a fairly bracing contribution on the topic of energy market dysfunction, a perennial interest of this podcast. What did you make of it?
So bracing is one word. Highly abrasive is another. Before this report gets to its recommendations for what we ought to do in the two eras, it goes through where we are and some of how we got there. And along the way, it's like an omnidirectional punch up. It's giving a lot of people a jab in the ribs or a...
I'm just having visions of Tony and Nelson doing roundhouse kicks as various energy market bodies and advocates and state and federal governments get splattered across the screen.
Absolutely. Any number of faceless goons are being beaten to a bloody pulp. I share a lot of the regrets that are expressed in this report about the number of things that have been screwed up. And it's not just the usual, references to a lost decade of denial and time wasting and what have you. They do have some barbs for the various iterations of the previous federal government. But also, they stick the boot into state governments that have been building up little fortresses without regard to the efficiencies or benefits of cooperation. They have it in for various bits of the electricity industry, including the green bits, who have relentlessly talked their book and prioritised short-term interests over long-term functionality and efficiency. I think they could go a little further in castigating just the rest of stakeholder land, including people like me, who have just again and again failed to cohere around substantive long-term reform agendas for the NEM. There have been crazy brave efforts at big bang reform, and the big bangs blew up.
I particularly enjoyed their characterisation of the post-2025 process, which they kind of described stakeholders being initially interested but ultimately becoming bored and just wandering away like stray cats.
And they say this sorry history of failure to identify and implement major market reforms would seem to have been due to a combination of a loss of ministerial confidence in both the Australian Energy Market Commission and the Energy Security Board, the body established by the same ministerial council but poisoned by vested interest in the status quo or specific narrow initiatives. The result is that responsibility for reform is unclear. You could get to the end of that section and just kind of want to, emigrate to some place that's got its shit together.
Maybe the US.
Well, maybe. Yes. Do your reading before booking your ticket, dear listener. But I think that the distinctions and the ideas that they sketch for like the where next are good. And broadly, for the coal closure era, the messy period of muddling through that we're in, they say, as crap as how we got here is, the current mix of interventions is like build on that, concentrate on making that work, the capacity investment scheme, the 1,000,001 reliability mechanisms that have been trotted out in the last few years, the money for transmission, and they're recommending, okay, let's do these deals to manage the messy bit of coal closures. Let's prioritise removing roadblocks to new transmission, because that is the absolute keystone without which nothing else works. And just don't make too many further changes to the rules, to the policy mechanisms, other than those things, for the next little while, because they'll take too long and they'll distract effort. And then they've got these ideas for the sunlit uplands. Who wants to describe them?
Well, I just want to start by saying how helpful I've found this demarcation in the kind of the jobs that we have before us, because I think a lot of the time, and we've spent many years kind of trying to deal with the immediate crisis at the same time as we plan for, the future, the brave new world of a high penetration renewable energy system. And by trying to think about those two things at the same time, I think the different nature of those challenges gets quite confused. I think it's very difficult to sort of reform a market which is in transition. And this period of flux, if we do our job right, should last for, 10, 15 years. And then we should be through it. We should hope to have achieved some sort of new status quo. So the idea that we're kind of making ad hoc interventions and doing what we need to do to keep the lights on, to use that hackneyed phrase, like, okay. But by doing that, we don't need to give up on the idea that we, could foresee a world in which we do return to something approximating an efficient market, and that we should be thinking about that in the background while we're doing what we need to do right now.
Yeah, I was definitely more attracted to the part of this report that was talking about the post-coal era and the things that we might be getting on with at that point. And some of the things in there, so, it goes to the stuff that has been just put in the too hard basket, like the idea of an enduring carbon signal for the energy sector. And, the obviously the purpose for needing that post-coal is that we're still going to have gas in the energy system, maybe more than others might have thought prior to the release of the future gas strategy. But watch this space. We'll talk about that one on another episode. But there are other things in there around, like, effectively doing a clean sheet review of a bunch of stuff of the energy market agreement, to, like, the way that states and territories work with each other to manage energy markets, governance review, and then a sort of a more strategic approach to effectively the demand side. And it's a couple of those things that I wonder whether they, whether this report is really asking that those things are put on the back burner for 10 or 15 years. I feel like that's too long to be looking at things like the governance of our energy markets and the better coordination of distributed energy resources, or things that happen behind the meter.
I don't know if it says on the back burner in the Grattan view as you guys took from this. Like, yes, they're saying it's going to be a little while before post-coal, but not that long. Like, they're saying, look, you could hit their 10% of annual energy coming from coal threshold as early as 2032. So 8 years worth of get your ducks in a row. We could just about make that. We'd have to start the work pretty soon, though.
Yeah, that still feels like too long away to be tackling some of these things. And, like, I guess and I should say, and we given who's on this pod, and I think we would have said, oh well, what about distributed energy resource and the demand side and behind the meter? That the wonderful folks at Grattan have to scope these reports in a way that keeps them reasonably tight and focused. And so whilst this report doesn't deal with that in a substantive way, they've acknowledged those issues. They're going to be doing that via a subsequent piece of work, which I think we're all looking forward to. But I mean, 1 in 3 households has solar on top of it now. The cost of batteries presumably will drop pretty significantly over the next 5-6 years.
I saw a bit of Bloomberg New Energy Finance info just the other day saying the price per kilowatt hour of storage of battery energy systems in China has dropped by 2/3 in the last 2 years.
Well, so like, taking into consideration those things and just the woeful state of governance when it comes to the consumer perspective being represented properly and the factoring in of demand side action, I just don't think we can afford to be waiting that long to be getting on with this this stuff. I agree with I really do agree with their attempt to distinguish between those two eras, but I'm not sure that I'd be wanting to wait that long for some of the things that they suggest start to come next. Like, we've got to get better at walking and chewing gum at the same time and having those conversations about governance reform, even if it's not implemented straight away, right?
I should be clear. I wasn't suggesting that we just park it for 6 or 7 years. I don't think that's what they're saying. I think it's more about kind of teasing apart the tasks and not trying to do them both at once. And so it's a bit, it felt a little bit like they don't use this particular framing, but it's like we need to fight the war. And the war is to maintain reliability during this era of coal closures, managing the exit of traditional large coal-fired generation while we're ramping up, the renewables and the firming that we need to replace it. But it's like, we fight that war, but we have someone else or some other smart people simultaneously thinking about, about what it looks like after that. Well, it's like the planning for peace bit. By distinguishing between those tasks, I think you have more of a chance of effectively dealing with both of them. If you are constantly trying to do them both at once, then it just becomes very, very muddy. Yeah. I was thinking a lot about our episode on Ron Ben David's report last year. Not a million miles away from this. They also were kind of like, encouraging us to strap in for a bunch of muddling through. And he was advocating for, the role of state governments in just doing what needs to be done and actually taking responsibility for managing this period, but didn't have as much thinking about what comes after that.
Yeah.
Or even much hope that there could be an after that. And I think this report almost builds on some of that thinking in Ben David's critique and goes, well, okay, well, there's some truth in that, but we shouldn't give up on the idea that there is the sunny upland, there is the thing that we can aspire to, and we should be working on that as well.
Yeah.
I think something that's interesting in both of those reports is the attitude to the old system, the NEM as it was conceived in the 90s. And formally, most of that is still in place. In theory, the energy-only wholesale market and the financial markets around it is the foundation of everything else, not just the dispatch every 5 minutes the pricing every 5 minutes of power, but guiding investment decisions. And it's not really able to play that role anymore, given the nature and the extent of the interventions. But there's also a very real question whether it ever could have been fit for the purpose of guiding investment under conditions of transition like those that we're in now. And I've felt there were conflicting currents of nostalgia in the Grattan report for a system that was hands off and guided by economic efficiency, but also a strong sense that that system just was not set up for anything like the conditions that we experience today. And so if you look ahead to, okay, well, we do all these reviews, we rethink the reliability framework and prune the tree of reliability initiatives to just a handful of things that make sense. What does the market look like? Is it still going to have energy only at its centre when 80 to 90% of the megawatt hours sold in it have a zero short-run marginal cost? Is that still going to work? It's a big question. And when that question, in theory, could have been asked during the ill-fated NEM 2025 project, not enough people really wanted to focus on that. I think there was a perception from a lot of energy industry stakeholders, all these state contracting schemes are the real action, and they're going to be the things that make new projects viable or not, and who gives a stuff about this core market design stuff? We'll just leave it in place. We'll focus on the thing that really matters, which is an approach that has met its limits, I think.
I thought this report did a really wonderful job at summarising some of the perversities in the way things have developed over the years, particularly when it comes to individual states pursuing their own policies around both the bringing on of renewables, but then the real disconnect between state governments on transmission infrastructure and how they support, the coming on of that generation. Like, i.e., that is not done in an efficient way currently at all, where it may make more economic sense to be, building generation in one state and having transmission between two states to service needs in both jurisdictions. Like, that kind of isn't happening, or that decision making isn't provided for or prioritised. One of the sort of issue or buckets of issues, I guess, in the muddling through era that really grabbed me is around the social licence piece when it comes to building out transmission infrastructure, particularly. Is just, there's not like a huge, not in this paper, I don't think it's their job necessarily, but there's not a whole lot of what exactly do we do about that to make it easier or to fix it. And we've touched on this in quite a few papers in recent times, just the potential for us to not meet these targets, 82% of the grid being renewable by 2030 and the like. It is all contingent on an enormous build out of transmission that we've not seen before. And it's all being done in areas that, even though they might be concentrated in renewable energy zones, the volume of infrastructure hasn't been done before. It demands a kind of novel approach at the way the sector engages with communities. I was just very struck by the frustrations that might be shared in this industry when it comes to approvals that are needed for other forms of development, like housing. Those are very long-term endeavours. You want to build new housing in New South Wales, that's typically, for large projects, that's an 8 to 10 year planning horizon to get that happening. So I just feel like the energy sector is starting to feel the pain of complex approval processes, and at least to date, the fixes don't tend to present themselves very easily in terms of achieving, better outcomes at the kind of multiples of time improvements you would need to see. So I just think it's a huge risk area, and it does keep popping up in these reports. I feel like we need to do some reading on and what to do about that bit a little more. The
Andrew Dyer report that Grattan cite a few times on community experience of renewables and transmission projects. Might add that to the pile.
Yeah.
Add it to the pile. And one of the more eye-watering graphs in this report goes to the timing of the construction task for both utility scale renewables and transmission. Students of the integrated system plan, step change scenario won't be shocked by this, but just, to hit something approaching 100% renewables by 2050, a good 50% of the transmission that we need to do that needs to be built in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And pretty similar sort of amount of the utility scale renewables as well. Just, it is an eye-watering task. There's a lot of talk about social license around transmission and renewables in the regions. I was really struck that this report expanded the conversation of around social license to just consumers and consumers remaining invested in this transition from the point of view of just general reliability and affordability as well. And that's the other bit that can get lost in these debates, that there's just like a fundamental, will people keep voting for governments that keep trying to get this thing done if community expectations around energy affordability and reliability are not met? And I think that's a massive question mark, and something that we do need to solve for, and what way that we, win those hearts and minds and bring everybody along for the journey is something that I think politicians around the country are really grappling with, and has to be the people factor in this, not just in the regions, but in the many metropolises across the country who have many millions of people that are ultimate users of the system. They need to be invested in it as well, right?
Well, and they're going to pay for it is the other point. So, so there's the sort of what level of, of reliability are consumers ultimately willing to pay for, and I guess the service level, people are expecting, and you need to sort of work with that, and that side of it, getting the sense of what consumers will or won't accept or want, hasn't really been done. And ultimately they are paying for it. So,
and there's really interesting sort of reflections in the report about actually kind of engaging with consumers about what level of reliability they want to pay for. Indeed, the reliability expectations in response to some of the uncertainty in this transition have actually been raised in recent years, and that inevitably loads on cost.
Well, it goes to that level of reliability then dictates what cost is in the, effectively the insurance policies you take out to make sure you can meet that reliability target. And there would be, varying amounts of cost could get very expensive depending on, just how high you wanted to push that. And I think it's interesting that that's raised in the context of variable renewables and how you might firm that. But I mean, the same thing could be said for reliability failures of aging coal plants and the existing infrastructure that we've got.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in the discussion of reliability, including the saga of what the nature of reliability challenges is under a very high renewables system, which Grattan described, I think rightly, as quite different in character to reliability challenges with a heavily thermal system. There's the fear, really, that if things go wrong under a high renewable scenario, they're going to go wrong for reasons that are important across large swathes of the market at once, that you have a correlation of low wind everywhere, or high winter-related heating demand everywhere, or problems with solar over a wide region, in a way that, in theory, when clanking old coal power stations drop like flies, they don't necessarily all drop off at once. Although the winter before last, like 25% of them did, for a whole range of reasons, and they're very critical of the move by the states and the former federal government to adopt this interim reliability measure that's 3 times tougher than the formal reliability standard. But the reason that was done was that I think AEMO and ministers had the same concerns as Grattan about the fundamental unsuitability of the old approach that's cemented in the reliability standard under these new conditions, but they could not think of a different kind of metric or approach to assuring that. So they just said, okay, well, let's turn the dial to 11 on the existing kind of metric, expected unserved energy, and that'll give us this extra layer of reassurance that things will be okay. And they have, in fact, despite that, continued to be very, very worried. Every single intervention on reliability has not left people much calmer than they were before.
Yes, well, and they make the point that having two reliability standards makes the NEM look less reliable because of how reliability is being measured in various contexts.
Guaranteed bad news story. And their idea of, the reliability panel recommendation that they cite is just there's only so much the core reliability standard can do, and beyond that, governments should look at insurance mechanisms, perhaps literally like payouts when there's a lapse in reliability from an extreme event, or government-owned assets that exist only to swing into action in extremis. Although those can be pretty expensive.
And aren't a part of the market, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. We've gone a while, but do we want to talk about the carbon bit of this a little more? I mean, who can resist?
Clearly not you.
Well, I think what you're intimating, Tennant, is that they're saying that one of the things that's going to be really important to provide the kind of guidance that we need for the electricity system over coming decades is an enduring carbon signal. And they are playing footsie with an idea that has popped up a few times on this podcast, which is including the sector in the safeguard mechanism.
Which in theory it is, but not really. Yeah, and I think that is a good idea. There's other ways to skin that cat too. But in addition to the argument that for this kind of idea that we talked about before, which is that even once coal is retired, a price signal is still really important to govern investment in, disinvestment in, and operation of gas plants. And like, if hydrogen peakers are going to become a thing, like how? Economically, how? Yeah. The hydrogen will be more expensive. If we achieve $2 a kilo hydrogen, that's still $16 a gigajoule. So something's got to send a signal on that. But the thing that I think people should have in mind as well is the absence of a comprehensive settlement on emissions in the NEM was one of the factors that made everything impossible to agree during the last few rounds of other energy market reform. Anytime something was proposed, like the capacity mechanism, a bunch of people went, oh, but isn't that going to prolong coal or lead to a bunch of gas getting up? And it either killed those discussions or it meant they had to have all kinds of belts and braces to assuage those fears. So if you could just like right tool for the right problem, solve the emissions problem, then we could like lower the temperature a bit, on the rest of the very difficult reform discussions that would be involved in the full Grattan agenda.
Are we done? That's it?
Oh yeah, it's solved. We're well into the post-coal era, at least rhetorically, on this podcast.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. And I will open the batting this week because I want to do some listener mailbag, and in particular circle back to that excellent piece of commentary we received from our friend Dylan McConnell, who sent us a long and a thoughtful email reflecting on some of the critiques we mounted against AEMO's gas statement of opportunities, that chart pinata we took a stick to a couple of episodes ago. You might recall in that episode we spent quite a bit of time whacking the GSU for its fundamental misalignment with climate targets, not properly addressing demand-side opportunities, defaulting to an assumption that supply is always the answer. And we also pointed to the ISP as another AEMO-produced document that has undergone quite a bit of evolution on both those fronts, which led us to speculate on what was driving the discrepancy. Now, Dylan made a lot of interesting points in his email. He pointed out that the ISP and the GSU are fundamentally different documents, which is true, and suggested we would have been better off comparing the GSU with the Electricity Statement of Opportunities, also known as the ESU. He also reminded us that it's unsurprising that GSU is throwing up supply-oriented solutions because that is what it's designed to do, and it also isn't in its remit to take into account broader climate commitments. There were several more points in his email, but I think they give something of the flavour. What do you reckon, Tennant, Frankie? What did you make of Dylan's intervention?
Well, he is, unsurprisingly, as a knowledgeable and diligent energy market observer, technically correct, but on a deeper level, so wrong.
We love you, Dylan.
No, he's terrific, and he's right. He's right. But the job that it's not doing, even though, yes, it not its job. It's not GSU's job to do what we criticise it for not doing. But the thing that it's not doing is something that really needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just don't know that it's tenable, really, in 2024 that a GSU wouldn't be considering what could be done on the demand side to limit the need for new production. And I guess I would level the same critique at the ESU. Like, does that contemplate energy efficiency measures behind the meter? Like,
only in the same kind of very passive sense.
Yeah.
Here's our best guess of what will happen. We're not going to make it happen or encourage it to be made happen.
Yeah, one of the things that Dylan suggests is, maybe there should be an energy efficiency statement of opportunities, which is something that, has been bandied about. And I think, whether it's really in our interest to have like competing statements of opportunities, one for supply and one for demand, like I don't really know if that's really smart, because like, how do you co-optimize across the supply and demand side if you've got these dueling documents?
Yeah.
So ideally, I think these would be integrated exercises. So I think we take the point that is what the GC does, but our counterpoint is it should.
Well, I think I would agree it and warn what you might get if you keep producing documents that are saying wildly different things. Presumably, the supply side people continue to read the GSU and the ESU because it's in their interest to build more stuff or to add more supply. And the demand side people do the same with the DSUs or whatever they might be. But there's got to be a way of reconciling those two, and I don't really think they should or need to be separate exercises.
So while there were several points that I couldn't quite get behind in Dylan's long email, I heartily endorse some of his alternative title suggestions for our episode, which were all riffing on the GSOO of the acronym known as the GC. So the first one, and I'll get you to pick a winner out of these. Grasping straws out of options.
Ooh.
Going sooner, officially obsolete, or gradually sidelined, occasionally obligatory. Do you like grasping straws, going sooner, or gradually sidelined, Frankie?
I feel like going sooner. The obsolete one appeals to my sensibilities more.
I like that one too, but I fear that going sooner has been officially denied. But we'll cover that in next fortnight's episode.
All right, thanks, Dylan. It was a great read. We really appreciate you taking the time to lob in your thoughts. And for anyone else that wants to do the same, mailbag at lendmesomeUp.net. Frankie, what have you got?
I'm returning stateside for my one more thing, and all the pod listeners will know, because we've talked about it a few times, that the government's in the process of developing sectoral decarbonisation plans. I have a particular interest in the built environment sector plan. So I've been looking across the pond at other jurisdictions that have been doing similar work like this. And I had the opportunity to talk with some lovely folks from the US Department of Energy and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who were involved in the production of a document, so released by the White House just over about a month ago, I think now, and it's their blueprint for decarbonising buildings. So lots of interesting stuff in there. It identifies, the levers you would expect to see, in a document focused on the building space. Talks about increasing energy efficiency. It talks about maximising opportunities for behind the meter on-site energy generation. It adopts some really interesting language around what we call in building space grid interactive buildings. So it's sort of the optimization of consumption and production of energy behind the meter. That includes things like flex and load shedding, but it'll also look at things like how we use batteries, how we integrate EV charging, all that kind of thing. And they talk about transforming the grid edge is their way of categorising that. And their sort of subtle and stronger emphasis there is on very much reducing the amount of infrastructure that needs building out, because wouldn't you know it, building out of transmission infrastructure is not just an issue in Australia, and the US blueprint is positioning buildings as a key solution area. Sort of the buildings as batteries and a lot of potential to limit spending on infrastructure. And it also talks about reducing embodied carbon. Particularly in the material space, which is the delightful crossover between tenants and my sectors into the future with the industry sector. So there's some good stuff in there, and in terms of the framing and the discussion. The TLDR, though, is the federal government there sticking with their hurricane of carrots through IRA and various other programs they've stood up. And, if we thought our federation was complex to navigate, don't try look at how the US seeks to regulate things like building standards. It's very complex. So they're leading with a lot of incentives, and there's a lot of coaxing and support for states and local sort of government levels to be doing more with the various levers they've had. But it's all good food for thought. So any buildings wonks out there, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can have a look at what the US is talking about.
Delicious, delicious carrots.
Focus, Luke. Focus.
Save me, Tennant. What have you got?
So I wish to draw everyone's attention to a recent collab between two energetic titans whose subject matter could doom the world or save it. I'm not talking about Godzilla x Kong, the new empire, although that was a lot of fun, but a recent episode of the Volts podcast where David Roberts and Michael Liebreich had a terrific conversation about the 5 horsemen of the energy transition that could doom it, including cost, which is problematic in several ways, the soaring demand for critical minerals, regulatory capture, politics, predatory delay, but also the 5 superheroes of the transition that could forestall doom, including exponential growth, bit of a surprising superhero to some people, the systems solutions that are available, disappearing demand, great power competition, another surprising force for good in this space, and the primary energy fallacy. It was a great chat and well worth a listen.
All right. I think that's a show, gang. As I said, if there's anyone out there that wants to share their papers, their feedback, their thoughts with any of us, and maybe you'll be featured on a future mailbag like our friend Dylan, we could disagree as fiercely with you as we did with Dylan McConnell. Oh, the joys. You can send them into mailbag@letmesumup.net. We also have a website. Frankie, what's there?
Everything except our recent federal budget BOCO analysis, which you'll all be flocking to the LMSU Patreon.
I thought we'd banish that language.
I know. But our entire back catalogue of delectable LMSU episodes on various papers, past, present, and soon to be into the future. Some tantalising stuff coming your way. So it's all there at letmesumup.net.
And tenants, if our listeners like the cut of our jib and they want to support our work, what should they do?
Well, what they should do is pile on over to patreon.com/letmesumup and follow the simple step-by-step instructions to back this podcast and help ensure that it can be produced whatever crazy scheduling demands Luke has exposed himself to, like trying to produce multiple podcast episodes while running 2 conferences back to back.
What could possibly go wrong, Dennis?
Yes. So you can take action to make this podcast a better place, an equally good place into the future.
Indeed. We would appreciate the support. But in the meantime, for Frankie Muskovich and Tina Breed, I'm Luke Manson. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.